interrupt this incredibly awesome music to bring you some incredibly awesome political talk on Damn Radio.
That is correct. I am Samuel Trapp. This is International Flavor. Sitting here live in the Lake Ozark Real Estate of the Arts studio. Feel free to send an email to live@damnradio.com, or should you feel the urge, make a phone call, 573-746-8020. Last night, after my reading of the Russian response to the lunacy of the Z-Man and the... I'm not so sure. Because he didn't seem too convinced himself of what he was saying. Rubio, his commentary, and then the response by the Russian diplomatic corps, that guy, Dmitry, what he had said, his response was so much better than their statements. And I got to thinking about it. You know, the path is to do what is always done. The only purpose left for the UN these days is politics. This is where you get to come. Nothing ever gets done there. As I have indicated over the last week or two, nothing happens in the UN anymore. It's a joke. And what they do is it's just political theater. It's where you get to come and everybody has to stand up and say their political jibes at the other people, and nothing ever occurs. Nothing. And, Trump gets up there and says this is a weak body. We could go back and play that for you again, Trump's statements to the UN about how, nonsensical that they have been acting. Of course, he went a little further, geez, the escalators don't even work, teleprompter don't work. I could have rebuilt this UN building for $500 million, and instead you spent over 1.3 or whatever the hell it was that they ended up spending. And but he also talked about what they get done there, which really isn't anything. I mean, what do they do, seriously, besides politics for only one side? I started assembling a list, because the format people have been complaining about for a very long time, that is extremely dominant by people that it shouldn't be anymore. I mean, in all seriousness, think about this. Your UN Security Council, there are how many members of the UN Security Council? The council itself, there are 15 members, but 5 of those members have veto power, okay? And those 5 with veto power are who? The ones with veto power: the UK, France, United States, China, Russia. I suppose Russia, China, the U.S., I get that. France and the U.K., I mean, they're tiny. There are so many. That part alone is outdated, okay? With how in the past we are, Why don't we get a list of because I don't remember what the top population countries in the world, and see where they are, right? The countries by population 2025 by World Meter says the following: India 1.46 billion, China 1.41 billion, US 347 million, Indonesia 285 million, Pakistan 255 million, Nigeria 237, Brazil 212, Bangladesh 175, Russia 143, and Ethiopia 135. So China, the U.S., and Russia are still in the top 10, okay? They at least make it. Russia's down the line, but India doesn't get a veto, do they? Indonesia doesn't get a veto. God forbid Pakistan or Nigeria should ever get a veto, right? And Brazil. Oh, geez, number 7, Brazil. Who's going to give them a veto? And Bangladesh, geez, people don't even know where that is. So let us continue down the line just to get to the top 20, right? Let's go with number 11 is Mexico at 131, Japan 123, Egypt 118, Philippines 116, the Congo 112, Vietnam 101, Iran 92 million, Turkey 87 million, Germany 84, Thailand 71. That's the top 20. See who's absent there? No France, no UK. Okay. So let's keep on going just to find out where they went, right? We did the 21, Tanzania. So that's their number 21. Number 22, 69 million people, the United Kingdom. 69 million. And they have a veto power over the remaining top 21 countries, which I wonder if you could add them all up quickly, which I really can't do. But I didn't add it, but it's a huge amount. And number 23 is who? France with 66 million. So these two tiny countries get to veto anybody else just on this basis alone. Don't you think it's time to change the structure of the United Nations? And who gets to run it? Okay, let's see where these top 20 people come from. Okay? Asia, Far East, Asia, Africa, Far East, Middle East, Far East. No, I'm sorry. That would be Asia. Mexico, that's South America. First one in South America is at number 11, right? Ethiopia, there's Africa. Russia covers a very large swath of land there. That's Eurasian. Bangladesh, that's Asia. Brazil, South America. Nigeria, Africa. Pakistan, Far East. Indonesia, what do you call it? Far East Sea, but I suppose you could call it Southeast Asia. United States, of course, and China and India. The South. Are they even being represented? The biggest populations of the world are in the Far East. Now, do I say that we should be controlled by them somehow? I do not. That is not what I advocate. I don't advocate it at all. But I can also tell you that there has been some pretty strong pushes to get some sort of change to what is, darn it, my map disappeared. What is that? Not my map, my chart. In order to get something different in this do-nothing UN. And they keep talking about it. And all it is political theater. It's a political theater for people who want to still tell the rest of the world what to do. And that's the... Oh, JR wants to talk to me. Do I have to turn you on? Do I have to do... Yellow. Oh. I don't know what I'm doing. Hold on. How about this?
Check.
Oh, you're on.
You're saying it's about population. My only point is that have you checked into the GDP? Because I could see it being the high GDP nations getting veto power.
That's part two. But
sorry.
But GDP doesn't include any of these either. You want to go to the highest GDP. That then is the U.S., China, because I remember these off the top of my head. It'll take me a second to get there. But it's the U.S., China, Indonesia, Japan, Russia right now.
Japan, I didn't think of Japan.
Yeah, Japan's in there. And they are, and India is moving up, So, and I'm not saying we need to change anything. I'm glad that you came in here.
It's just an idea.
And it's
crossed my mind.
It's not a bad idea. And,
whoever said it was about
either way, the U.S. would still, if you're all into veto power, I wonder if it's not time to get rid of the idiotic veto power anyway. But because it doesn't work, it never works.
Is there some reason it's these 5 nations? They must have some influence or something.
It started in. I shall get to it for you.
All right, I'll go listen. Thank you, man.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me interrupt.
No problem at all. Thanks for coming on in. At any rate, this has I don't want to say troubled me because it hasn't, but remember, the premise of my discussion here at the very beginning of this, at the very start of this, was that 3 leaders, including the Z monster, 3 world leaders, and there's been more. There have been plenty more over the last years. But start with just this week. We have Trump, we have the Z monster, and we have Lavrov representing Russia, right? That all 3 have said this is a do-nothing organization. They do not have the power. And they don't have any power to do anything. And even if they did, they wouldn't. And the times that they do use the power, it's a corrupt use of the power. It's the West ignoring the rules, like Rule 100, non-biased, be non-biased, and in there, and they're not. Or the U.S., France, England, and with the help of Germany, supplanting and putting in a king in Bosnia, a guy who can, against the Dayton Agreement, and which said that in Bosnia, they would have to be approved by the Security Council, and they were not. And Russia and China objected, strenuously object. Yep, that works. And it didn't work because the king is still there doing whatever the hell he wants. And it's an interesting concept to get rid of this, I suppose, for lack of a better word, outdated principle of this organization. So I went and I did a bit of a chronological study of veto votes, right? But it's a really big data set. And so first I wanted to look up UN Security Council votes over time. And I wanted to break them down by question, topic area, and then I wanted to correspond them to a data set of vetoes, right? So I get all this data together and I start having a look at it, and it's way too much data. So then I decided, why don't we go back? Because it's a huge data set. They've had thousands of votes since 1946 when the UN Security Council was put into place. And by the data vote, by the topic, by the voting record, yes, no, abstain, or absent for each member at the time. So since 1965, the Security Council has had 15 members. And before that, they had 11, okay? And there is an official source to go get all of this. You can go to the UN Digital Library and pull up all of this data. It's a lot of fun. They keep official records, right? And you look under the meetings and resolutions section if you're interested. And so The practice of the Security Council is a UN-maintained resource that summarizes voting patterns and then provides a thematic organization of resolutions. And then they have a bibliographic database that provides searchable metadata of resolutions, including who voted and how. And then you can they have several compiled data projects that you can go and get these, like there's some academic ones, like Columbia University has a UN Security Council data set, which is in CSV format, with all of it from 1946 to the present. Or you can get a political science research data set, which are, just researchers to go out and do their own independent. And so, and you just can go out to those web pages and check it out. So I decided to try and limit it to those that had a veto vote only. And that's still an enormous amount, okay? Since 1946, the UN Security Council permanent members, the P5, China, France, Russia, the UK, and the USA, and Russia, by the way, was, granted, Yeltsin wrote a letter to the UN and the UN Security Council and said, the Soviet Union is no more. Russia is going to take the place of the Soviet Union on the Security Council, and we're going to keep the same powers that they had. And nobody said anything. So it's not like anything even happened. Nobody had a vote. There was no motion. There was no resolution. There was nothing. It's just Yeltsin sent a letter saying, the Soviet Union's gone. We're Russia now, and we're keeping all the same powers. Have a nice day. And that was that. And it's worked, and nobody's ever questioned it. So there it is. But since 1946, these permanent members, China, France, Russia, the UK, and the USA, can veto. A single no from any one of them blocks adoption, no matter what the other votes are. And so I wanted some examples, okay? Like February 16, 1946. Here's an example. The Spanish question. The USSR vetoed the admission of Spain onto the Security Council. 1971, the U.S. vetoed a resolution on the People's Republic of China versus the Republic of China. December 18, 2017, Jerusalem status in 2017. The USA vetoed a resolution condemning the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Yeah, U.S. votes on Jerusalem on Israel's behalf. Always. You can't find one anywhere where they voted against. Never. February 25, 2022, the day after, there was a Ukraine crisis, and Russia vetoed a draft resolution condemning its actions in Ukraine. Well, that's convenient, isn't it? So from 1946 until today, there have been nearly 300 vetoes. Russia uses it the most. The USSR and Russia, between them, have 120 plus vetoes. The USA is next with 80 plus. The UK, 30. France, 20. China, 15. So China has been pretty pragmatic in all of this and doesn't take positions very often. They play well with others for the most part. So I chose to dig in a little bit, and I also wanted to break it down a little bit since the collapse of the Soviet Union and go straight to Russia, because like I have opined on this channel frequently, I believe the USA and the West have made dramatic and serious mistakes about what they have done with the Soviet Union and the relics of the Soviet Union, the satellite countries of the Soviet Union, and the peoples surrounding thereby. And it's all been in an effort to destroy Russia. And I know... Still, no one to this day has ever outlined to me why we in the Americas, why we as Americans should consider Russia our enemies, except Putin bad, we're good. Except, oh, geez, that Putin's a dictator. And let's say he is. I don't believe that, but let's say he is. Aren't there dictators in other parts of the world? We don't hate them. You think? I don't know. Let's talk about countries that have bad leaders. They're everywhere. They're all over Europe. We don't condemn them, do we? I mean, what's his name? J.D. Vance goes over and says, geez, there's no freedom of speech in any of these countries. You don't have any democracy. And somehow these are the good guys, right? We get to go over and destroy Moldova and make sure that people don't have free and fair elections in Moldova as the West. We're doing the same thing, only successfully without a war in Moldova. We've done the same thing all over Eastern Europe, where we usurp power, we sponsor coups, we engage in regime change everywhere. And we, I mean the entire collective West. That's what I mean by that, because everybody's complicit in it, and we've been doing it for years, especially since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So I thought that it would be fun to go back and look at what has been occurring since the collapse of the Soviet Union with the votes. And so on December the 24th of 1991 is when Russian President Yeltsin sent a letter to the UN Secretary General saying that Russia will continue the USSR's membership in the Security Council, including its permanent seat and vote. This was not formally voted on. The UN Secretariat simply accepted the letter, and the other permanent members, US, UK, France, China, didn't say anything, so there you go. Since then, Russia has exercised same rights as USSR, including its veto power. No gaps, no readmission. Veto passed seamlessly on. Nobody's said a word since. Okay? So then I got to thinking maybe we should look at the vetoes since the collapse of the Soviet Union, since 1992 forward, because this was December 1991. And here's a summary of the votes by country, right? Russia. After 1992, Russia has used the veto more than any other P5 member, mostly on issues involving the Balkan states. Because remember what was going on. Like I just said, they're all over the Balkans. The West, the collective West, is replacing leaders, setting coups, forcing revolution, having, whatever revolutions they want to all over. And so Russia has been condemning it since the very beginning. They've condemned actions in the country of Georgia, and rightly so. What the UN and everybody did down there is not correct. They've done it in Syria since 2011 and in Ukraine since 2014. Everything that they sponsor on the Ukraine side, they have done. Now that's kind of a brief summary, but the Balkans is the big one. The Middle East is another. Ukraine and Georgia, because in the former Soviet satellite republics, U.S. has been all over that, trying to make sure they're all anti-Russia for some reason. Sorry about that. A little bit of decaf coffee in my veins right now. So the U.S. has had also its dozens of vetoes, overwhelmingly to block resolutions critical of Israel and Palestine. Now that is its own topic for another night, because I think that far too few people, and by the way, I'm partially one of them. I know enough about it to be dangerous, but I wouldn't sit here and opine as to what's correct and what isn't. But I do know that I have always listened to these, and it'll be the entire UN condemns someone. The Security Council will vote 14-1 to condemn Israel, or the entire body of the UN, all countries involved, will vote to condemn Israel for what it's doing in Palestine, and the only voices to say, no, thank you, we won't condemn, are Israel itself and the United States. And that is sad. You want to talk about a powerless body? The UN certainly fits that description, right? And so the U.S. overwhelmingly, I mean, there's very little else. China, far fewer, but they do fairly often align with Russia, especially on places in the, Syria and in the Middle East and Iran, Pakistan, places like that, if there's something that comes up. The UK and France have been pretty rare after the Cold War, but occasionally on colonial or African issues, they want to try to remain relevant, but the fact is they're not. And whether by GDP or the other. You know what I meant to do? While the old J.R. O'Pal, friend of mine, was in here, I meant to do a quick GDP by country. I can't type either. Most of that is related to the fact that I can't freaking see, but there you go. List of countries by GDP, and using the this is coming from the International Freaking Monetary Fund. Why not use those a-holes? How about that? No, they list it alphabetically. Nobody wants that. Who's in charge around here? Let's see. Let's take the World GDP rank 2025. Come on. Here we go. All right. So, if you take the top now, and this is dollar-based GDP. Now, I'm going to do a separate list, which is called Purchasing Power Parity GDP, which is actually more accurate. And that's what your money will buy in your own country. Okay. And so, we want that. And let's see. Either way, the U.S. is first. Okay. And China is second. Actually, China's ahead of the U.S. if you go nominal, but if I recall, but I need to get to that list. If you're going actual dollar for dollar, only dollars, what it buys in the United States, in New York, here's what it is. United States, number 1. China, number 2. Germany is still number 3. India is number 4. Japan is number 5. United Kingdom is number 6. France is number 7. Italy is 8. Canada is 9. Brazil is 10. Russia is 11. Spain, Korea, Australia, Mexico, Turkey, Indonesia, Netherlands, Saudi Arabia. Top 20 rounded out. Actually, Poland is the last of the top 20, right? In that list. So, of those on the Security Council, the U.S., China, UK, and France are in the top 10, and Russia is number 11. Okay, and so arguably Brazil should be there, India should be there. I mean, if we're going by GDP and we take the top 5, those with the veto power should be the U.S., China, Germany, India, Japan, right? This year. And either way, you need to look at it. But if we did a different search and did a GDP by purchasing power parity, which is the fair way of looking at it, PPP, let's see what this one says. List of countries' GDP by PPP. And this one is China is number 1. These are 2025 numbers. China is number 1, and United States is number 2. India is number 3. Russia is number 4. Japan is number 5. Because remember, what you have, the money that you earn in Russia, buys a hell of a lot more than your dollar buys in the United States. There, most of us would be wealthy, very wealthy. So the average, when I was over there last time, because I always quiz and see how it fluctuates, right? If you make on average, call it 600. I know a lot of pensioners over there make $400 a month, $200, $300 a month, and they can live on that, paying all of their their expense. Not all, but they that is a livable, survivable wage. Okay, and in the U.S., hell no. Okay, now, and so if you ever went to Bangladesh, or if you ever went to Sri Lanka, if you ever went to Nepal, you go to some of those places, your dollar goes very, very far. Okay, and you can go over there. I mean, I've told you, like, when I was just recently in Belarus, Lithuania, Russia, Belarus is actually a little bit on the expensive side, to be truthful. The Lithuania, slightly less, but not by much. But Russia is still, you can still do pretty well over there for having a nice meal for two in a decent restaurant, and I mean a full meal. Of $15-$20, breakfast $6, something like that, and a nice full big. Breakfast, lunch, whatever it is you're going to eat. And, I mean, try to go out here. You can't get a sandwich at freaking Wendy's for $6 anymore, It's nuts. And, I mean, your money goes 10 times further there. So purchase power parity. If you can go over, you can buy a brand new car in Russia when I was in, which one was it? Was it Kyrgyzstan or was it Uzbekistan? I can't remember. But one of those countries, the president had decreed that cars could only be white. And so all the cars were white. And I was asking one of they don't use Uber over there. They use Yandex, and Yandex is the Russian version of Uber. And so I'm in one of those, says, what's the story with every car being white? I mean, how come none of these cars are different colors? He said, the only way you can get a car of a different color is with special permission, and it's never granted. You have to really know somebody. I thought it was weird. But anyway, that has nothing to do with where we're going. But I was asking him, how much the car costs around here? Because they had these really cool little vans that were looked like a matchbox. They were so small. These little, but they were cool as hell. And I said, oh my God, I want one of those. And I said, what would that cost me? And the guy starts adding up the money, and so I start adding it up from their currency to our currency. It was like $4,800, brand new. And I'm like, oh my God, that's cool. And all the new cars you see over there, you buy a brand new car for like $4,000 or $5,000. It's nothing. And even the nice cars, there are a lot of I don't know, your Kia style. There's some really nice Chinese cars all over that area that you wouldn't believe, and they're all really cheap. Anyway, I've sidetracked myself with where I was going because we got to get back to where the UN was. But if you're going to argue that the GDP by purchasing power parity, then it should be China, U.S., India, Russia, Japan. Now, if you go to the United Kingdom and France, they're listed as 9 and 10, and Brazil is ahead of both of them. Indonesia is ahead of them. Germany's ahead of them. Well, why doesn't Germany get a permanent vote? Germany's in both piles, aren't they? Aren't they? I can't remember where they were population-wise, but in GDP, they're number 6. But population-wise, where is Germany? Holy crap, Germany is not on there. I thought Germany had so many more. Nope, Germany is number 19. Germany has 84 million, number 19. Why don't they get a veto? They don't get a veto because their country had a Hitler in it. And that's the truth. I mean, No other reason. Everybody's afraid that a new Hitler will come back. Russia's talking about it now. They're saying Merz is saying some of the same stuff that Hitler put out. Pretty crazy, huh? Anyway, let's get back to my original point. We've taken that little jaunt down a side road there. Let's get to some post-1991 veto examples. In the 1990s, Russia vetoed a draft resolution on Bosnia-Herzegovina. They didn't like it. They said, this is nonsense. Frankly, I happen to agree. I mean... Though, what happened to self-determination, where you get a vote and you get to say things without influence from somebody else, where the U.S. just went in many of these places in the Balkan territories and really cocked it up, for lack of a better word. Everything that we went in, we replaced leaders, we replaced anybody that was pro-Russia. You got rid of them, but whatever means necessary. And I still, again, would love somebody to tell me why Russia was always the big bad wolf. Russia has always been the big bad wolf, and nobody will tell me why. Nobody. And nobody has put it out in paper except Putin is a bad man. That's it. The end. What else is there? So in 1997, China vetoed a resolution to extend an observer force in Guatemala. Remember that? They were pissed off about the recognition of Taiwan. So they vetoed a resolution about observer force in Guatemala. 1999, Russia and China vetoed the draft on Kosovo and said NATO should get the hell out. And they haven't, and they're still there. NATO is running the place. Another king by a different name. And they're still there. 2002, the U.S. vetoed a draft condemning Israel taking action in Gaza. There's a surprise. 2007, Russia and China vetoed a draft on Myanmar and said it was interference in their own internal affairs, which it was. In the 2010s, from 2010 to 2020, Russia and China both vetoed 15 times drafts on Syria, sanctions, chemical weapons, ceasefire. They vetoed them all. From 2017, the U.S. vetoed a draft resolution condemning the recognition. They vetoed a draft resolution condemning the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. In the 2020s, Russia vetoed a draft condemning its own special military operation in Ukraine. We don't condemn our own action, right? U.S. doesn't. They never. And multiple times in 23 and 24, the U.S. has vetoed multiple resolutions demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. Everybody else votes yes. All 15 or 14 of the other people on the U.S. says no, the only party. China and Russia in 2024 vetoed a draft to extend sanctions on North Korea. And then I promised that I would tell you the breakdown of vetoes since Russia took over the veto power. There have been 30 vetoes by Russia, 25 vetoes by the U.S., 10 vetoes by China, and they say it's very rare, 1 or 2 for UK and France. Very rare. And so there are no vetoes. So I was sitting there thinking about these timelines. And if you look at since the Ukraine war, Russia vetoed the draft condemning its operation with the vote was 11-1-3. Pushing the issue to the General Assembly, which then adopted a motion 11 to 111-1 by 141 to 5 to 35. Since then, Ukraine-related texts have been blocked or watered down, while General Assembly procedures, including the veto explanation, they get to talk about it some more. It's all politics. Okay, so it's always political. Post-Cold War resets, Balkans and Kosovos. After the USSR, Russia, always consistent on the Balkans, and Russia, China on Kosovo have always wanted non-intervention by NATO. And they always, all of these intrusions into the Balkans were done without authorization by the UN Security Council. And they're supposed to have UN Security Council permission to do so. And they never do. They just do it anyway. And so from the same time, the UK and French, let's talk about this. The U.S. vetoes any text condemning Israel and Palestine ever. China occasionally condemns anything talking about Taiwan recognition, right? Russia and China block drafts that seem to be intrusive into the internal affairs of another country, like Myanmar in 2007. In 2011 to 2020, it's usually all about Syria. On 2011, or from 2011 on, Syria is the veto epicenter. Russia and China repeatedly blocked sanctions, referrals, chemical weapon drafts. There were a dozen of them, arguing Western drafts were always one-sided and escalatory. And Western members say vetoes shield atrocities in Syria, right? And once again, that's why they went to war. And I believe the only reason that Israel and the U.S. got away with what they did in Syria this time is because Russia was occupied in Ukraine. There was a lot. We talked about that when it came up, when they took the opportunity while Russia was engaged with Ukraine to go, hey, man, they're not watching. Let's go do this so they don't stop us. Now, even if they veto us, who cares? We'll turn it into a military action and do it all without them, which is exactly what they did. And they did the same thing in Iran, right? So in 2022, since then, it's all been Ukraine. And let's see. The vote on the first one was allegedly, on the one condemning to vote for Russia, was 11 condemning, 1 veto, 3 abstention. We're not voting, okay? And let's see. The Gaza issue has really, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the North Koreans, that has split the veto votes since that time. So from 23 to 25. U.S. vetoed multiple Gaza ceasefires, arguing that they undercut hostage negotiation. Right, that's what it was. And in March of 2024, Russia vetoed the renewal of sanctions against North Korea. And it ended the 14-year monitoring of the North Korean People's Republic. China stayed out. Everybody else backed the renewal of them. So these are the two big current axes, U.S.-Israel and Russia and North Korea. So you can get these. Now, let's go into a little bit about changing seats or the veto of a UN Charter amendment. You need a UN Charter amendment to change it. And an Article 108 requires a 2/3 General Assembly approval and ratification by 2/3 of member states, including all of the P5. And those are the veto powers. So any one of the vetoes can kill any structural reform. And that's why these things still are a problem, because they cannot change the UN Charter. Nobody can change it. Because one or the other side, like the China-Russia side, or the U.S., France, England side is going to veto the other, right? But literally, if you let's go back to a historic word that Trump used last week. The paper tigers in the room are England and France, right? They don't have anything to do with anything. It's either Russia, China, or the U.S. that really matter. Russia and China are on one side, U.S. on the other. Whatever the U.S. says, France and England are going to do, period. And China every once in a while acts on its own, but usually it's Russia against the rest, right? And China usually backs Russia. So there are several blueprints that they have out here. And the world has definitely changed since the time they had this in. And now the world is far more developed. I'm not saying the populations weren't relatively similar scale, not the same sizes, but relatively similar scale over the years. But now it's a lot of these countries are developed. You can't say that Russia is not a developed country. You can't say that China is not developed. You can't even say that about India anymore. There are some fantastic cities everywhere. And technology has really expanded. So several plans, several blueprints have come up. Try this. The G4 plan. This plan has India, Brazil, Germany, and Japan add new permanent seats, which are included to them, and more elected seats to reflect the economic and population weight and financial and peacekeeping contributions. The latest G4 papers on this topic and joint statements continue to press this line. India's case rests on its population, economy, peacekeeping, and regional sway. You can't say that they're not important, but for these other factors, and this was always important at the BRICS conference, that was a very big learning experience for me, and I'm telling you that the rest of the world is looking for something far more inclusive. India especially. And India, as well as many others, recognize that these changes aren't coming anytime soon to a theater near you in the UN. It's not going to happen. They will not change anything. The fact is, it is the equivalent of an old white man's club, and, the young black rapper isn't allowed. And it's never going to happen in the UN. It's not going to change. And, it's a political good old boys club in New York. The talk about moving it to a different location has been brought up before. Why in the world's it got to be in New York? People don't like that. So the first plan is the G4 plan. Second plan is called the Africa Ezulwini Consensus, which came out in 2005. And they said that they need to be at least 2 African permanent seats with full veto rights. They talk more about a continental quality, right? So each continent should have so many seats, like a regional superpower, which is kind of so BRICS aside, BRICS is not regional. BRICS is going global. They are, like I said many times, creating parallel structures to a lot of what goes on in the UN and trying to create a different format for all of it, including each of their own, a different World Bank, a different payment structures, different everything. The world is a changing, people. And with Trump, with Lavrov, with Zelensky, and many others getting up and talking about how weak, you want to talk about what a paper tiger really is, look at the UN. They can't do anything. It's always diplomatic backbiting, diplomatic BS between each side. Nothing ever gets accomplished. Seriously. The core argument about the Africa one with the veto rights for, based on, the continent, core argument, historical underrepresentation of these types of people. Nearly 1/3 of the UN Security Council agenda concerns Africa, but no African country is on the P5, or really in the in the council at all. There's nothing. They're just seriously underrepresented. The next one is called the Uniting for Consensus. Now, consensus takes on a bad connotation these days because, consensus, nonsensical. And they have Uniting for Consensus, or it's called the Coffee Club. This is a movement led by Italy, Pakistan, Mexico, some other countries that oppose new permanent seats. They favor more elected seats, regional rotations to avoid creating a new veto-wielding elite class, and they want to manage regional rivalries like India-Pakistan. This group is a major roadblock to those in the G4, India, Brazil, Germany, Japan, those ones. So the bottom line, India and Africa are blocked less by principle than by coalitions with veto or numbers to stall any model that elevates any sort of rival or dilutes any existing privilege. And so the P5 consent rule is the decisive break. So the only ones that really matter are the P5, which is truly sad. And if you look at this, the question becomes, is the council outdated? So what do they argue? What did the Z monster argue? He said the UNC is ineffective because of Russia's veto. That's it. Russia's veto, he said, he thought that they should curb the veto use and let the General Assembly override a veto or remove Russia's veto and seat. Because they've been aggressive. Politically, these face Article 108, which is a wall, and they've pushed veto accountability debates previously, and the General Assembly's veto explanation sections, and nothing's ever going to happen there. Lavrov says, he says, the problem isn't the veto. It's a Western-led instrumentalization of the UN. Selective intervention, sanctions outside of the UN Security Council. They only use the UN when it's convenient to do so. Otherwise, they do it without. Like the U.S. unilaterally controls the IMF and the SWIFT banking system and all of the other methods of imposing sanctions upon people outside of the UN Security Council. So we either put everything through the UN and the UN Security Council or shut up, is basically what he's saying. Because these selective interventions, like the U.S. overthrowing the regime in Ukraine and many other places over the years, none of that is with UN support. And, you can condemn it, but it's too late. By the time, okay, well, that's a political condemnation. Great. You can't politically condemn Israel for nothing. You can, but so what? It means nothing. So what does the UN mean? He said it's all about sanctions outside of the UN Security Council and an information warfare campaigns, which are basically, you don't report about anything that happens in the UN to your own electorate because you don't want them to know. And he says Russia frames the veto vote as a stability check against the never-ending hegemony and unilateral nature of the UN, and he backs, or Russia backs, multipolar rebalancing, which would include greater African and global South voices, but doesn't surrender the P5 veto power. Doesn't get rid of it. Then Trump jumps up. He jumped up first, actually, and he did it in 2017 and 2019, and he did it in 2025 here. He says the UN is nothing but a bloated, I agree with him, by the way. Unaccountable bureaucracy that fails to solve any conflicts, stresses national sovereignty over globalism. And in 2025, he blasted the UN for not even trying to resolve any major dispute. Reform in this lens is less about seats and veto than in efficiency, cost-cutting, and outcome. So he blasts the UN for not trying to get rid of major disputes. And, that in part is because the West insists only upon its way in everything. So the UN is a bloated, fat, expensive, worthless organization, according to Trump. I frankly happen to agree and don't see it's fun to watch because it's all politics all the time, but it's really a waste of space. Nothing ever comes of it. I mean, you could sit down at the end of the conference of the UN, which is going to end later this week, I think. Might stretch in a few more days after that. I don't think so, though. And then they break and they come back in a little bit. But this season of the UN, I mean, seriously, what will they accomplish? I'm going to actually pull up this month after they're done having their self-congratulatory parties about all the things they didn't accomplish over the last couple of years. And we'll go through the list and see what it says. There's some new reform ideas that are circulating around out there. And they want to use a restraint of a veto, like get rid of the veto in the case of mass atrocity. Now, from my perspective, I think this veto restraint is more about beating up on the U.S. than on anybody else. But it's going to hurt all the P5 members if it does come about, because this veto restraint would say that if, and I don't know the exact, but there are several different proposals, and they're talking about this veto restraint, that if only one party in the entire place says veto, and the only people that support Israel are Russia and the United States, you couldn't have a veto on that. I mean, if maybe there's a percentage of the vote, like in America, for example, if the president says veto this bill, and Congress comes back and gets whatever the amount is, 60% of both houses to override his signature, it becomes law anyway. Right, they're talking something like that. In 2015, they started another sort of movement, and it's still out there. It's called the French and Mexican Initiative. It asks the P5 to voluntarily suspend veto when genocide and war crimes are on the table. And over 100 states support this idea, but not all of the P5. U.S. notably doesn't support that because they know that Israel is frequently accused of genocide and mass war crimes, killing people, and so they won't agree. And it becomes obviously it's just nothing but a political tool in the UN anyway. Let's see. There's a code of conduct proposed by Liechtenstein that urges no veto on credible atrocity response drafts. And this one has 121 signatories that include the UK and France. These are political pledges, not law, but they are the most alive, if you would call it that, reform ideas to get to have this. And then, so that's veto restraint. Okay, the next ones are called seat expansion. Like I told you about the G4 model. They want 6 new permanents, including the G4 and 2 more for Africa, plus 4 out of 5 elected seats. And a veto for new permanents is the sticking point. They don't want to give new new vetoes to any more than the people that already have it. And the Eswatini that I told you about has 2 African permanent seats with 2 full vetoes, right? In the UFC, I told you about that already. And then there are some that are working methods with accountability. And one they call the General Assembly Veto Explanation Debates, which started in 2022. Whenever a veto is cast, the General Assembly convenes, and then they get to say, this is nonsense. You should have to explain yourself. Basically, it's a method of shaming someone or calling them, well, look what you're doing. You're evil and blah, blah, blah. But none of it is binding. So this veto explanation is, again, more just politics. That's it. And then maybe some transparency tweaks have been some idea also. More open briefings. I don't know, people being able to see more. I'm not so sure. But if you look at function versus legitimacy, the UN arguably still has some functionality of some sort. Not a whole lot. I mean, what do? They have peacekeeping mandates. They have sanctions lists. But there's nothing about the great power things. Syria, Ukraine, Gaza, Korea, North Korea. I mean, none of these things do much. That is allegedly by design, right? They designed it this way. The veto prevents a coercive action against a P5 or its close ally. If you say it's a do-nothing, it's doing, I suppose, what the Charter intended. It's blocking an escalation that a great power rejects. But is England or France a great power? Is that what they are? Just because they have nukes? I mean, if that's the case, why isn't North Korea one? North Korea has nukes. Why isn't Pakistan? Why isn't India? Why not? Why isn't Israel? They have nukes. It's not the nukes. I object to calling them the great power, but that's kind of what they've been put out. But the Charter is doing what it says. From Moscow's point of view, this is a feature that is supposed to protect certain parties against bloc politics. From Kiev and Washington's point of view, it's a moral paralysis because you don't get to condemn Russia, right? But who gets to condemn Israel? Nobody. So why should you be able to condemn Russia for doing what America does regularly in other places and allows Israel to do, as it sees fit with no interference, no condemnation of any kind. Rest of the world condemns them, but the U.S. won't, right? And I'm not saying they should. I don't care. That's not the point. I'm talking about vetoes. And I'm not saying I don't care. I'm saying it's not the issue I'm talking about today. I still think it's wrong what they're doing over there. Let's talk about the representation gap, right? India and Africa's claims are very strong. India has been ignored forever. They're the largest population on the planet with a great GDP. And nope, they got nothing. They contribute tons of troops to these peacekeeping efforts. They are on the agenda pretty frequently because of the issues in their countries. And, but the only executable path is a deal that the P5 won't accept and no regional rival is going to be able to live with. Every package needs something for Africa, some sort of answer on veto power for any new seat. So basically, it wouldn't surprise me if some other organization came along and changed what was going on in the world. And, maybe that's BRICS. Maybe it's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. You realize that's Russia, India, and China. How much percentage of the world is that? That's a massive percentage. I don't know off the top of my head, but it might even be over half the population of the planet. It's a pretty big pile. I mean, take the how much? What percentage of England's, whatever it was, 69 million people, or 70 million, whatever it was, 70 million people, is India with 1.48 billion. 1.48 billion. And, they don't get any recognition for anything. And they're contributing, I'm not saying I want all of these things to change. I'm telling you about the arguments that are out there. And so you're going to have some answer on vetoes, some regional sorts of side deals, India, Pakistan, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, Japan, China, Korea. This is going to be, it's not about numbers because you can't get past the Article 108. You can't amend it. Nobody's going to allow it because, well, what about me? What about me? And so it's always going to be the same. So what's the near-term reality? Don't expect any change to the charter. That's not going to happen. The only reforms moving are going to be soft. Maybe we should have to explain our veto. Maybe we should have a transparency. Where you actually have to, open up these debates so people can see them, and not, you can't do anything behind a closed door. In Africa, who's going to give them seats? They've had historic injustice against them, but arguably so is Asia, right? So is Asia being pitted against Africa and both of them pitted against South America? You never know. So it's a tough thought, but it's something to think about. We already talked about the vetoes that we've done. Sudan, Gaza, there's what else? Nope, that's the end of the line on that. We were going to go through a little bit. There were some funny things. Well, they're not funny. They're sad, really. But we're now talking about the 19th sanctions package. We want to restrict Russian diplomats' movements, according to Kaja Kallas. Brussels is preparing measures to curb Schengen, that's the visa for Europe, mobility for Russian diplomats, consular and technical staff, and families, meaning 24-hour notifications, route details. This is an idea they've been trying to put together with Kaja Kallas, right? And they want to limit what Russian people can do inside of Europe. You don't get to do the full Schengen visa and use it all over. So if you come into France, for example, you can drive into Spain, Germany, wherever you're going to go from France, and you don't cross a border. You cross a border, but it's like crossing a state border in the United States. You don't have to show a passport or nothing, except in pretty rare circumstances. They're trying to say that they want to track Russians with these visas, and that you don't have that kind of ability anymore. So there's talk about that in Europe these days. There's a lot of, here we got Rubio and Ratcliffe talking about strikes on drug boats in Venezuela, and the rest of the world is going, look, this is nonsense. You're using the military. I've not been for this. I told you that before when they blew up the other boats. You can't just go blow people up and then, with no trial, no nothing. Maybe it's the law school education I have. I mean, you don't just condemn people to die without even arresting them first, And they, drug trafficking boats. Now they're saying they're ready to take the fight by land as well. You're going to invade another country to kill their drug dealers. Now we've been doing that for years, I believe, anyway, through CIA-backed deals where people go in and privately do stuff. But I don't agree with that either. That is not our deal. Shouldn't be there. What else was interesting and funny? Slovakia put an interesting constitutional change. Get this. They want, and it'd alarm you to know that this is the case. Bratislava passed a constitutional change that gives Slovakia their own law is superior to the EU law on national identity questions like family, gender. They want to get out from under this. You got to honor the gays because you're in the EU. You got to honor transgenders and, do all them. They don't want to. They say that our national identity doesn't go with that. Vance and Kellogg are all running around talking about giving tomahawks to Ukraine. We're taking the gloves off. We're going to sell even offensive weapons. Like Rubio in that speech yesterday said, we can sell even offensive weapons to Ukraine. Well, like what? The tanks that Russia's destroyed, the Abrams tanks that litter the battlefield, or are trophies inside of Russia. And I'm not saying it's. If you give them tomahawks to bomb inside of Russia, you aren't helping. Okay, that is not helping. And if you think it is, you don't understand Russians very well. You just don't. And we're ready to take the gloves off now, is what they're saying. And the Kremlin is saying, well, we're looking at these remarks very carefully, and we are prepared. And, Washington, these comments, basically, it seems to me, they're testing sort of red line rhetoric and see what it is. Moscow, how do we force Moscow to capitulate? They're not going to. You need to be focused on forcing Zelensky to capitulate is what you need to do. Orban says that the EU is now on a war project. Hungary's prime minister said that the EU's center of gravity has seriously shifted from economics to war. And he said the way to end the war is for the West to stop funding Kiev, because if they did, Ukraine would collapse very quickly. It would be over. And this is he's stating a core Kremlin talking point. The economic interest is in, we're killing off all the Ukrainians, and then when it's done, we get to go in and rebuild their country and take over all of their land. That's what's happening. Sikorsky from Poland, the foreign minister, he says it's a World War I sort of deal. The war will end when one side runs out. Sikorsky told Western media the war ends just like World War I. One side exhausts all its resources. Therefore, the West must ensure that Russia is the one that loses all its resources. That doesn't appear to be happening. If they were going to run out, they'd have run out already. They are producing missiles, weaponry 10 times faster than the West. No doubt. Read any even Western military journal and you will find out the truth on that. Russia says to this, bet against Russia's depth and wartime adaptation. You've made that bet for many years and lost. And that's true. It's absolutely true. So then another Polish guy, Tusk, says, this war is our war now. He's trying to convince the Poles to that this is our war, that the Ukraine war is their war too. And Tusk keeps telling Europeans to treat the Ukraine conflict as their own. Presses for mobilization of their own people and unity. In comments this month, he said Poland is not formally at war, but Russian drone incidents and hybrid pressure does put Europe in a danger zone. That they're in a danger zone. We all need to get ready for war, basically. These people are nuts. Sweden is talking. Freaking Sweden is talking about shooting down any non-responsive aircraft. So what happened? Sweden's Air Force commander, a guy named Michael Claesson, said aircraft violating Swedish orders will risk being shot down after warning procedures, part of a broader hardening around Baltic airspace after the alleged crossing of the airspace, not even in Sweden, but Russia crossing EU airspace allegedly last month, which Russia denies. Let's see. A drone wall. After these drone incursions that allegedly, these weird drones are flying all over in Denmark and Copenhagen, that these drone incursions that closed airports and spooked military bases, Denmark has banned civilian drone flights and called up several hundred reservists. They're calling people to war because some drones, civilian drones, flew near an airport. EU leaders are in Copenhagen discussing a drone wall along the bloc's eastern borders, putting new defense integration steps. Allies are deploying counter unmanned aircraft units to help Denmark secure their spaces. Brussels is moving out another $2 billion from proceeds on frozen Russian assets to buy drones for Ukraine. Now, how does that equate? Some unmanned drone flies over an airport in Denmark, and that equates to, why don't we give Ukraine another $2 billion of Russia's money? This is nonsense, people. Anything for anything. It's they're just given, this is a contractor's bonanza with no effect militarily. You activate some reservists? Great. How long is it going to take you to build this drone wall? Forever. This is another a pointless rhetoric to spend money that you get to steal from someone else. And I don't want to go into this peace plan and Tony Blair. Jesus, I talked a little bit about this Tony Blair, like, oh yeah, Tony Blair's great. Let's bring him in. I talked about that last night. I'm not going to go into that. But let us do a couple of other items that came up today. The Prime Minister in Hungary. Oh, I haven't even seen this yet. I need to read this. Maybe we should check this out. Government shutdown in the United States is looming. Let's see what the which paper is this from? Ukraine. This is a newspaper in Russia, but it's not one of the typical ones I read. It says announces that the U.S. Senate has failed to pass a spending deadline. Uh-oh. The U.S. Senate failed to pass stopgap spending on Tuesday, hours before the midnight deadline. Republicans hold a majority. They need Democrat support to clear the bill under the rules. Democrats refuse to back the measure, instead propose alternative to permanently extend health care subsidies. Chuck Schumer blasted the Republicans as extremely partisan. Oh, yeah, there's a surprise. And accused the GOP of refusing to negotiate. Republicans know the American people want the Republican health care crisis fixed, but Republicans are about to shut down the government instead. Senate Republican leader John Thune blamed Democrats for the looming shutdown. Gee, there's a surprise. Republicans blame Democrats and Democrats blame Republicans, saying the GOP would not be taken hostage to provide illegals free health care. Donald Trump's earlier warned of irreversible cuts to government programs and mass layoff of federal employees if lawmakers fail to agree on a spending bill. Last government shutdown began on December 22nd, 2018, and lasted for 35 days. So the old Trumpsters used to these. You know? Ukraine is pushing to get Trump a Nobel Peace Prize. Wow. There's a surprise. Several lawmakers praised the U.S.'s efforts to mediate the Kiev conflict. Isn't that fantastic? A group of Ukrainian lawmakers has proposed nominating President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize, saying his strategic foresight and efforts to settle the conflict between Kiev and Moscow are praiseworthy. Several politicians worldwide have made similar gestures. But most of these attempts are seen as trying to curry favor with Trump. The bill, registered in Kiev on Monday, was submitted by 8 MPs, including high-profile lawmaker Anna Skorokhod of the opposition center-right For the Future group, as well as Georgy Mazurashu, representing Vladimir Zelensky's Servant of the People Party. Isn't that great? Maybe he'll win. What else do we have of excitement around here? Oh, yeah. We wanted to talk about this new $5 billion contract for the Pentagon. Yes, indeedy, David. The U.S. Department of War. You know, let's comment on that for just a minute. Do you think this is because Trump knows something we don't? It's couched in terms of, well, it isn't the Department of Defense, it's Department of War, right? Where's the Department of War? We need to be ready for war. We don't need to be, why do we need to be ready for war? We can't be ready to defend ourselves? Department of War says the opposite. We're ready to attack people. We're ready for war. If you're a Department of War, guess what? Those looking for war will very much find it. That is true. I'm not sure I like that idea. But anyway, the Department of War has awarded weapons manufacturer Raytheon a $5 billion contract for its Coyote missile system, according to a notice published on its official website on Monday. This comes amid an unprecedented expansion of the Pentagon's budget under Trump and his shift toward prioritizing homeland security. The notice said funding will cover production of launchers, drones, radar systems, with the contract running through 2033. System includes Coyote small expendable drone capable of autonomous or pre-programmed flight for about an hour. Variants are designed for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, counter UAV missions with proximity warheads, and electronic warfare. The U.S. military has been testing the drone for surveillance, strike, and interception roles. The new contract coincides with the White House's $1.1 trillion defense budget for 2026, a 13.4% increase focused on missile defense and homeland security. Precedes a high-level meeting at Quantico on Tuesday, called by Hegseth and attended by Trump. No agenda has been released. I wonder about that meeting. I forgot all about that. In August, Raytheon was awarded $3.5 billion to produce AMRAAM medium-range missiles compatible with the NASAMS air defense, supplied by the U.S. to several nations, including Ukraine. I am not a fan of this escalation. And probably very important here, this is a joke, Poland has arrested the Nord Stream bombing suspect, a Ukrainian diving instructor alleged to be part of a 7-member sabotage group, is facing extradition to Germany. The Polish authorities have arrested this Ukrainian diving instructor, who is suspected of the September 2022 sabotage of the Nord Stream gas pipeline. The man who has been identified as Vladimir Z, no last name, not Zelensky, is it? Identified by German investigators, Vladimir Z was detained in the city of Pruskow and will be transferred to Warsaw for extradition. Media outlets previously named him as Vladimir Zhuravlyov. Zhuravl is a crane of the bird, a crane, a Zhuravl. So Vladimir Zhuravlyov, Vladimir Crane, one of 7 people who reportedly sailed aboard a yacht named Andromeda, which German prosecutors have linked to the explosive attack on the undersea pipelines connecting Russia and Germany. Moscow accuses Germany and its Western partners of blocking Russia's participation in the investigation and steering the probe in ways that avoid implicating actors of the state. The Kremlin has said that if the Ukrainian government is confirmed to be the culprit, the blame should fall on the administration of former President Joe Biden for encouraging such recklessness. Germany's first request for Zhuravlyov's arrest in Poland in 2024 was obstructed by Polish officials. At the time, they claimed that a vehicle with Ukrainian diplomatic plates helped him flee to Ukraine after he was tipped off. The guy from Poland. Yeah. Wow. Things are very interesting in this world. Last month, the Italians arrested another member of this Ukrainian group who was identified as Sergei Kuznetsov, age 49, near Rimini under a European arrest warrant issued by Germany. Crazy sauce. Crazy. What else do we have? Oh, and get this. Here we are 1 day after the elections in Moldova. And guess what? Moldova is urging faster EU acceptance. Brussels has to find a solution to overcome Hungary's veto, says Chisinau. The EU must find a way to move forward with Moldova and Ukraine EU membership bid despite Hungary's veto, Moldova's chief negotiator Kristina Gerasimova told Politico on Monday. Qualifying for the next stage, which started last year, requires unanimous approval from all 27 EU members. But Budapest opposes Ukrainian membership that says Kyiv's treatment of Hungarian minorities in Western Ukraine is horrific and fears the country's agriculture exports would hurt Hungarian farmers. Moldova's application is twinned with Ukraine's. The Hungarian veto on Kyiv also stalls Moldova. For us, it's important that a solution be found regardless of what it looks like at this point. We very much hope there will be sufficient unity for a decision to unblock the situation and move forward to the opening of new clusters. Yeah, but God forbid there be any sort of real elections in your country. They're certainly not fair. I know. Let's have a whole bunch of ballots or some chads, some hanging chads or something like that. Welcome to Moldova. Call it Florida 2.0. And how they get to proceed with their EU by making sure that people do not get to vote. Hungary's blasted Poland as well for dangerous Russian comments. And Viktor Orban accuses Warsaw of warmongering. Dear Donald Tusk, you may think you are at war with Russia, but Hungary is not. Neither is the European Union. You are playing a dangerous game with the lives and security of millions of Europeans. Interesting. Orban's a pretty vocal guy. I like listening to him. Well, folks, we are winding down here at International Flavor. I very much appreciate you having been here this evening, listening to the show, and you can follow me and this show every night from 9 to 10:30 at www.damradio.com/live, or all the recorded shows are at internationalflavor.com. You can download them there. Thanks for being here. Have a good night.